Just a couple of issues on the investment committee work plan. Chris and I had a brief conversation earlier this morning, and obviously a lot of work has been done by the investment staff this past year. We sought committee members' input in June, and if you note that in your packet, it actually reflects the priorities that the committee identified. But at the same time, we also noted that we didn't want to come up with a lot of major initiatives for this new fiscal year for the investment staff. There was a significant decision by this board to move considerable assets from external managers to internal managers for this year. I think we need to monitor how that is working, what's working well with that, and hopefully it goes really smoothly and turns out to be a great decision by this board and our staff. But we have to, I think, monitor that closely. Chris and his staff have identified and ranked what our priorities were. But at the end of the day, the real work of our investment staff is to generate about $10 billion in profit, in earnings next year, or wins next year for us. And that is their primary charge. Chris, if you could just maybe highlight a couple of things that you want the board to be aware of in the work plan, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so in the fall we'll go through the risk factors. So remember the 6 factors that we created last year that you approved of. We'll come back to you with how we're going to measure those, and I'm pleased to say about 4 of the 6 we really are honing in on. There's a couple that are going to be really hard to figure out how to measure, but there'll be global measures, things that we can give you a dashboard and deliver to you on a regular basis. But we'll come back to you and say, okay, now that we kind of have this warning system, what do we need in the policy to be able to take advantage of that to protect the portfolio if we think it's a high-risk environment? So there'll be some real interesting discussions in September, particularly in November and then into February. The other thing I would point out, if you look at that, you guys voted, as always, for lots of different things, but the core votes were really around for a review of the global equity portfolio. I did get a couple of votes that didn't get added into that chart that we produced, and they came, and you can appreciate the interest in this, but they came from a focus in on California investments and jobs. So we'll find some way to kind of weave that into next fall. Obviously, that's going to be a huge priority for the state, for the U.S. government, and I can just sort of sense we're going to see pressure ratchet up on us to do something about the job market in California. For the sake of the board, I'll take you back in 2003. 2002, we saw that same pressure because we were coming off the 9/11 and the internet bubble crash, and we in PERS got a lot of pressure to try and create jobs. We invested almost $1.5 billion. I think PERS did about $2 billion. And looking back on it, I think it's fair to say we were very disappointed at the disconnect between, we got our money invested, the returns are still coming around, but there wasn't a direct correlation between our investment and the creation of jobs. There's a lot of movement and slip between those. So I think as we look at this going forward, and it's not going to be right away, but I'm going to talk to Joe Deere this week. We'll be at a conference together about what could we do together to kind of study what's a more efficient way for us to put our money to work and then see that stimulus. We need our return, everybody knows that, but we don't need to make other people rich. We don't need to have jobs go to Arizona and Nevada. And we just saw a lot of slippage. And I think before we embark on another like California initiative, we need to find a way to make it better so it's more effective. The reality is by the time our money gets to work, hopefully the economy will have already turned, but it doesn't mean we still can't take advantage of this as an opportunity and find some way to invest in it. So that'll come up as an underlying theme you'll see, even though it's not expressed right there in the front of the policy.
Okay, Chris, any questions or feedback to Chris? I would just like to lend my support for and I've said this privately to Chris, but I think also I'd like to state it publicly, and hopefully there's some consensus on the board around this, is we adopted the infrastructure policy, and we have a policy in place. We have a very talented staff person that's working here. Clearly, based on the data and the research that is out there, this country is facing significant infrastructure needs. And and I don't pretend to be an expert in infrastructure or infrastructure investment, but there is a significant need in our country to deal with infrastructure and infrastructure projects. And they vary greatly as to what they can be. They can be brownfields, they can be clean tech, they could be in private equity, they can be in the equity side, they can be on debt side. There's people a lot smarter than I am can figure all those details out. But to the extent that we can have our staff look at opportunities in the infrastructure space that are within our policy that make good business sense for CalSTRS and our system, to the extent that we can identify those projects and meet our needs, in particular around the area of projects that could potentially be hedges against inflation, could potentially be good cash flow investments over time, and meets our needs. And those projects can be in our country and potentially have, people can have learned from maybe mistakes that were made in the past or over promises that were made in the past, so that we're realistic as to what these investments could potentially mean in terms of return as well as other benefits. And if we can put people back to work and do something to help rebuild our state or rebuild our country and get a return on investment for CalSTRS, I think the teachers of this state would be very proud of this board and this staff if we could identify those projects. If we could do them with other funds and find ways to make that happen, that would be terrific. So I would just ask Chris and his staff to continue to keep their eye on that ball. It represents a relatively small piece of our overall investment pie, but it's a significant piece nonetheless, and I think that CalSTRS, I know CalSTRS has enough credibility and respect across this country in the investment world and in the political world, that if in fact we were to make some decisions around this area and were to lead, others would follow. And I trust that our staff will guide this board, and we'll work with our staff to the extent possible to make this a reality for CalSTRS and hopefully benefit our country as well. Grant?
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, Chris, on behalf of Treasurer Lockyer, for pointing out that even though California investments didn't make the top on that poll, that's still an emphasis. And I wanted to echo Harry's support for California investments and infrastructure investments in particular that can really, we should be looking where we can have some effect to really create jobs, fill infrastructure needs, while still meeting the needs of our system for a diversified portfolio and the returns that we need. So thank you.
You bet. While you brought that up, not to drag out the meeting for you, but I want to give credit to Alan Emkin. He came to us and said that he sort of saw this as a nexus and it would be an increasing issue. So Michelle Cunningham and John Petzel worked together. We put out a debt term sheet that kind of said, instead of you coming to us and demanding our money, and setting the terms, why don't we sort of say, if you have an investment, here's the kind of terms and conditions and the risk we'd look for. So we put that out there on the street. It's made the rounds, as far as I know, around the country. We're one of the only funds to kind of say, if cities and counties and states want to sell assets or build roads or do different things, we'll invest, but here's the kind of terms and conditions we're interested in. And Treasurer staff has taken that to, I think, the Western State Treasurers and a bunch of other treasurer organizations to kind of share that. So I've had calls from Oregon and other places that are interested in it too. And hopefully we'll be able to do something. But I appreciate Alan's advice of getting us out on the front of that. It's been interesting. The challenge is for cities and counties, how do you figure out how to sell assets and what do you sell? And certainly for us in California, we're going to have to get used to fast track and toll roads more. I know Southern California is starting to get used to toll roads, but boy, that's clearly got to be the future for a lot of this country. So it will be interesting, but I think it'll present investment opportunities. And so hopefully, even though it's been very slow on infrastructure, you'll start to see a pickup of bringing those to you.
Any other questions, Grant, or comments? Okay. Beth?
You know, Chris, I think one of the things we've talked about rather extensively is the fact that so much of the problem in the unemployment and the small and medium businesses are so fragmented and your scale is so large that to get an interface between these smaller enterprises and what they need and the scale at which you have to function from the staff perspective, there's just a challenge. It's a
we're
very
always gonna have to
challenging.
outsource to a manager who then does it. But this recession, where the last one was so tied to the internet and different things like that, this one's very unique because, as you know firsthand, it's so tied to residential real estate. And I know we don't want to be building big developments when there's no appetite for that, but we'll leave that to China. But it's going to be hard to figure out how do you take that whole construction industry and all the industries that fed into residential real estate, how do you get that stimulated again? The housing market is really in a tough way, and the mortgage market is just absolutely uncertain. So it's hard to figure out. That's why I think we should study before we try and make an investment and try and make sure we get the most effective use of our money.
Completely agreeing with you. I was going to just raise I don't even call it a suggestion because you'd be automatically doing it, but maybe an emphasis or whatever. I think that one of the challenges, as you're saying, is to keep the money in California. I remember we ran into this when they had the old-fashioned PICs that became work board investment. Anyway, in LA, they would spend money on job training, everybody get trained and move to New York, to try and get your money spent and then have it stay. Yeah. And to overcome that, what we did was go and find businesses that were in LA, like a hospital that wasn't going to go anywhere, and then the job training money went to train in that hospital so that the money and the training linked up. And what I was thinking of is I think the regional banks right now, the whole regional banking system, are being so highly regulated and pounded, which is kind of a problem. But, we keep hearing there are people who can get mortgages, but, everybody's screwed up title or the miasma in the local banking. And I think when you're doing this, if there is any interface at all that STRS could have with the regional banks, then regional, I don't know, if it be credit unions, mortgage banks, whatever the structure is of local finance in California, and if there's any place where that is aggregated enough or interface enough that STRS could play a role, I think that is one of the key things that, you can't fix the real estate thing when people don't have the money or the businesses aren't working. But at least with the regional banks, that the money is going to stay in California or with a regional credit union or whatever. And private money right now, if you don't qualify, I think we've talked about this before, but if you don't qualify at a local bank, it's 25%. Yeah. If you go out and just borrow, we just went through this, and if you want some private equity money and you don't have a firm that's had successful operations for 2 or 3 years, which is very hard to find with any real estate-based original enterprise, and you go to private investment pools, it's 25% money. We've just been through 3 different scenarios. So here we have, everybody's borrowing at 0% to help small and medium businesses, and small and medium businesses that don't fall inside the regs because of 2 or 3 years of earnings. Your only money is beyond usurious. So I do think that's freezing what is already a frozen piece of machinery. So I just would encourage you to see if somewhere in the financial bundle, not going directly to the real estate thing, because what can you do? You can't lend money to defunct operations either. We've got to make money for the teachers. But I think the whole screw up, for lack of a better phrase, in the ability to make mortgages, in the ability to make small business loans, not making you be the lender, but just there's very high returns in that field. You're lending internationally. I try and dig through the regional banking structure, the local availability of money. Forgive me, because it kind of tickles me. We're going to go out to India and find somebody and lend them the money to get 4 cows, and we'll do it at 6%. And you've got some poor dairy farmer stuck in Chino, and he, what can I say? There's kind of a disconnect with an awful lot of things. Anyway, so I just, money, the availability of money, or the regularity of processing the money, or the regularity of getting foreclosures done.
No, but looking at banks, mid-size or state.
Credit unions, anything.
Dana Dillon sent us a lead on a state bank that was modeled after something North Dakota did, but that was literally from the Depression era. But we're going to take a look at it and talk, and that's one of the things I want to talk to Joe Deere more about is at PERS. We don't want to own a bank because then our balance sheet suddenly gets under the Fed's rules, but it doesn't mean we can have 9.9% of a bank and try and help create more liquidity in that middle market. And I think it's not exciting investments because loans are pretty low key, but I think that's a safer way to try and put money to work and see if we can't help things.
Well, and
It's
then
not
you
our
have-
job to stimulate the economy. It's our job to
Thanks.
make
for that.
$10 billion.
Thanks for that, Chris. Is there,
I was just saying, one area, I sit on the advisory committee for the Western Farm Credit, which is PCA and the Land Bank and whatnot, and they actually didn't get too caught up in all this stuff because they were regulated and they issue their own paper and so on and so forth. And you might look at the farming sector too,
Farm
because
credit bureaus.
you cannot move farms outside of a state. I mean, you try and find things that are not going to go and take the money and take it out of the state. And farming's been doing pretty well. Some aspects
good.
of farming have been doing pretty well. So I just want to throw that out.
so seeing no other questions or comments, I do want to thank the committee for the work last year and staff. We did considerable amount of work last year, including looking at risk. We had a nice workshop on private equity. I think that the board found to be very informative and helpful. And obviously the key decision that we made in June in terms of moving some assets internally. So we look for a very productive upcoming year, Chris, and most importantly, to a positive year for the fund. So thanks so much to you and your staff. Okay. So that brings us, actually, we were going to move to item 15 on the agenda, and Ed and Berman are going to come up and update us, and this is an action item. So, Ed, are you going to introduce it, or Berman?
No, Berman.
Berman?
All right.
Welcome, Berman. Welcome, Ed.
What are we? Straight up on good afternoon. This bill, AB 1151, the board took action on earlier in the year. If I recall, it may have been February or May, but time is elapsing here. At the time, the board took an oppose unless amended position. The bill, I'll state it out what it does, or now it's proposed to do. The problem is the public retirement system in the state currently invests in publicly traded foreign companies that may be at risk to business ties with foreign states such as Iran that sponsor terrorism and are involved in the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The proposal it requires any determination by CalPERS or CalSTRS that taking action as specified in the California Public Divest from Iran Act would fail to satisfy the board's fiduciary duty to be made in a properly noticed public hearing of the full board with an opportunity for public comment. Specifically, what gave rise and concern to not only to the board but also our general counsel, gave them asset reflex, was the fact that there was language in there relating to the breach of our fiduciary responsibility. We took those comments, and during committee hearings, I expressed the board's concern with the bill and conveyed that to the author. But throughout the whole process, we agreed to continue the dialogue and discussions between our respective organizations. It culminated with at a hearing on the Iran divestiture issue, where Vice Chair, Mr. Keeley, and our Chair, Dana Dillon, had a discussion with the sponsor of the bill, Assemblymember Mike Feuer. And at that point, there was a kind of a meeting of the minds to have much more of a thoughtful discussion between our attorneys and Assemblymember Feuer. It took some weeks for those meetings to take place. However, when we did get a chance to meet, it was myself, Ed Durman, Phil LaRue, and Robert Carlin, who met with Assemblymember Feuer and his staffer. And it was a good vehicle, good opportunity to discuss our concerns. And after that meeting, the Assemblymember Feuer agreed to remove the breach of fiduciary responsibility and put in language that satisfies our general counsel. And as a result of that, the language or the bill as proposed to be amended, it was heard in committee last week. He took those amendments that we kind of agreed upon. And with that, there was reached somewhat of a memo of understanding between our respective parties that we would bring our recommendation, which is currently to move from opposed to a neutral position based on the dialogue and the conversations we had. It's been vetted through the General Counsel, and we feel comfortable and confident that now, as the bill moves forward, that it would not have an adverse impact on the CalSTRS system. And that's what our recommendation is.
For that update, Berman, and for the work of the staff over the last couple of months on this issue, including Ed and legal staff that are here today. Jerry?
I'd like to move that we take a neutral, if amended, as proposed position on AB 1151.
Pedro?
As with all other legislation, I will be abstaining.
Okay. So there's a motion on the floor to approve the neutral position if amended. And that's been moved. We need a second.
I'll second.
Okay, moved by Jerry, seconded by Kathy. Any questions for staff on the recommendation, the motion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that passes. Would you be so, what is your thinking in terms of communicating this now to the author and to Mr. Perez, the Speaker of the Assembly?
We can let them know right away what
Yes.
the board's action is, so that
Thank
they're
you.
aware of it.
Thank you, that would be
If they're not listening as we speak.
That would be our interest to make sure that and also Mr. Blumenthal and the chair, Furitani, and maybe Ms. Ma, who was also present
Sure,
in the
we can
hearing.
we can send something to the entire committee, just to let them know about the
Appreciate that.
committee's, the board's position.
And just two more things. There is a companion bill, Senate Bill 903 by Senator Anderson. We are discussing similar language changes to his legislation, but those have not been fully resolved yet. So that's another bill that's moving its way. And then lastly, to bring you up to date on our legislative funding discussions that we've had with members of the legislature. As my staff informed me, this is like fresh bread out of the oven. So in terms of meetings that we've had, I'm pleased to note that we've had, based on my staff, 83 briefings that have been taken, that we've had. We have a breakdown of Democrats, 40 Democrats, 23 Republicans in the Assembly, 19 Democrats, and 8 Republicans on the Senate side. I think we've, once again, pardon?
You're getting there.
We are. No, I have a little thermometer in my office where I go back, and we're almost there. And obviously, the end zone is 120. We have a few more this week. I think we're gonna, because the legislature goes into recess the 15th through August 15th. We may have a little bit of downtime and vacation time for my staff and so forth. But I think we're going to be able to reach that goal. So thank you.
Thanks for the update, Berman. Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah. Okay, I have a question for staff before we break for lunch. Is it possible, based upon what you wanted to report in closed session in terms of timing, that we do the closed session before we go into lunch? Do you think that would work?
Yeah, because it's very brief.
So why don't we do that so the public can step out, and we'll go right into closed session, and then we'll break for lunch.
And you'll want them, and we'll be back open at?
When we're done.
What do you think? 1 o'clock? 1:15.
1:15.
Okay. Yeah.
Number 3 is about 10 minutes for closed session, and then
Yeah, that's
45-minute one.
yeah, that's good. Is that all right with everyone?
Public a full,
Yeah.
it gives the public an hour.
Yeah, so for the public that's in the room or listening, we will go into closed session now, then we'll break for lunch, and we'll reconvene at 1:15 in open session. So 1:15 for open session. So once the room is cleared, we'll go right to closed session.
Are you ready? Or
We are, Jack, yeah. So
you're supposed to-
Ms.
Chair.
Harris, she just
All right.
stepped out.
Okay, so really, it's our last item of the board meeting for today, but certainly very important, is the annual business plan for the organization. And I'll set it up and just highlight a few things in maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then the executive staff's here to answer questions on any specific objectives or or projects for the year. And then we'll follow this with the investment committee, where Chris and his staff will drill down deeper into the specifics of the investment business plan for the year. But again, especially, I guess, Pedro, you're the only one here this would be new, this exercise for you with our board. But at the October offsite, the board kind of checks in on the overall goals and overall objectives of the organization, just in a broad planning manner. And then at this July meeting, we really try and set forth, obviously, the specifics of what we want to accomplish, either in the coming fiscal year, but in some of these cases, these are multiple fiscal year projects. So that's kind of how the two fit together. So it's a combination of short and long-term planning, particularly because we've embarked on such complex projects these last years that we are starting to get resource conflicts in what we do. And we're trying to get better and need to get better around prioritization of projects so that we're not having everyone stretched so thin on too many projects. Of course, it's the story of so many organizations. One thing I wanted to mention to you, and I don't know if you noticed it when you read the plan, but I can tell that for your October offsite, it is time for you to dig a little harder at the objectives and update them. And as you look through this report, we have different projects in multiple places. There's redundancy building in some of the objectives because they're not any longer perfectly relevant to what we're doing, or there's overlap in what they're doing. So I did want to caution you, I think this is probably the last year we should use this goals and objectives in the format they're in, and to have a good working session with your governance consultant in October to say, you know, let's look at these again. Are these goals still working? As one example, you have one specific objective on the Member Services Center, the feasibility of them. Well, you've long ago addressed the feasibility, and now we're on the execution of those. So just food for thought for your agenda for October is to look at that. If I could have you just look at the environmental scan for a minute on pages 84 and 85 and 86. And, you know, this, it may sound like simple bullets and simple thoughts here, but it really does. This is a very important part of the plan because theoretically, if we're doing our jobs here, we're executing objectives that relate to the weaknesses and opportunities that are indicated here. And Barb Diedisch, Barb Brenna, they're part of our planning group that really helped us organize this document. And I think we've gotten much better at this each year so that it's succinct in its presentation, but it's also quite meaningful in the words that we put on this page. Some of this looks like last year's, but the political chemistry of the state has changed. So you'll do want to think about the environmental scan probably differently than how it presented itself last year. Clearly, we mentioned in here our strength and as well as our weakness is that you continue to be a very savvy, wise board and looking at all these issues because you've had a lot of now tenure together as a board, and that's so true of the people sitting here and executive staff as well, but that also has turned into one of our risk factors going forward. So we need to spend some time on that. But if you look at the weaknesses, I mean, that's really where the work needs to be done on page 85. Clearly, the funding strategy remains front and center in what we need to do. Having said that, a lot's happened in the last 12 months. On the one hand, we've been laying very solid foundation with numerous legislators, as Berman went through with you this morning. We're now at the 80th legislator that we've visited with. We're visiting with business organizations throughout the state, which we had never done before, chambers of commerce, to talk about CalSTRS and how it differs from other systems. And we'll be meeting with editorial boards. So we've laid a much stronger public presence than we've ever had before. But most importantly, it links to the opportunities, and that is we have a new administration in the state. And how they look at issues, how they look at the budget, how they look at pension reform is a very different tone and focus than we had before here. So even though it may seem that public pensions are always in the news and everyone's talking about them, and there's an awful lot happening at the local government level, I would say that the opportunity is starting to develop here. Hopefully that people will be attentive to CalSTRS funding strategy. So going forward, this still remains our top priority, but you're seeing it appear now on legislator lists of things that need to be attended to is CalSTRS funding. So we're hoping that there is that convergence between the administration, the various parties, and our stakeholders, because everyone's been kind of off on a little bit slightly different page up till now with a little different set of priorities. So we need to see that convergence around our funding in the next 12 months. The other piece of the weaknesses that's we're quite honest and transparent about is in fact the need to update our systems and replace our core business technology systems that also will help us address the internal control issues and the data integrity issues that we all would like to see improved upon going forward. One thing that the tone of the document is a little bit different this year, and I guess I don't know if it was obvious or not, but in the past we've been a very high-profile part of the business plan has been improving customer service to our members. And there's still a long-term customer service improvement plan that is referenced in here with its components. But I want to make sure you realize that we're just finishing two major parts of the customer service initiatives. One is the offerings that we just put forward of self-service through what we call the MOST project, which now allows our members to do a number of labor-intensive internal transactions that will save us all efficiency, but also make the member able to deal with us on a 24/7 basis. And our customer service center here in the building, our call center, is just finishing up replacing its core technology as well. So when we think about customer service over the next 12 months, the two primary areas are getting that regional center up and going in Los Angeles and making decisions whether and when to expand that further. And the second probably is to think more about Pension 2 and DBS. I think one of the things we've tried to navigate in this pension reform discussion is, again, to articulate to all of our stakeholders that we already have a hybrid system here composed of the core defined benefit, the DBS, and then the voluntary supplemental Pension 2 products, 403B products. We need to do a better job of articulating that whole package to our membership so that everybody participates in a 403B plan. But we also want to think creatively about greater use of the DBS. So as part of your work plan during the year, Ed and his R&D unit will again try and think, are there other ways that we can expand people's forms of savings so that we can supplement the defined benefit plan. So that's the customer service pieces that are so important in the coming year. Apart from that, this document really is dominated by risk management activities, and that's really the tone that's changed here. And we can come up with all kinds of labels for how you want to organize that risk management, but there are a body of very intensive efforts here that are designed to add better internal controls to the system, better payment accuracy, better controls on and accuracy in the payments to our members. So a good way of looking at this part, it's the only part of the document I think we want to flag together today, is on pages 96 and 97 and 98 of the plan. Because on these 3 pages are a list of difficult objectives for us to accomplish because some of them are very complicated. But they are, in fact, game changers, many of these, for CalSTRS going forward, so that we can continue to get the data cleaner in the system and be more assured that people are being accurately paid and that things are being done right in the system. Obviously, the very first one listed on page 97 is bringing together all the thinking over this past year around the anti-spiking management of the system. And as you know, Peggy's made to you now 2 or 3 presentations. It's been really going through the types of controls that we do have in the organization, discussing the unique nature of compensation to teachers and the structured salary schedules that are used that are also an inherent control against spiking, but also being honest that short of seeing legislative changes, there are things that we can do that will cost money to hire more staff, but if we agree that there's still cost benefit to catching, even though they may be anomalous circumstances, there still is value to the system to applying more resources, as laborious as it may be, to catching spiking. And then, of course, last board meeting, you took an action really embracing a strong amendment at the Capitol to strengthen the proposals they've been debating. I think one of our frustrations for staff has still been the fact that we do not have clear black and white guidelines around spiking, which lends itself to lots of interpretations of whether something is or isn't spiking, and it creates a very emotional dialogue, but not always based on fact. And finding that fact has been difficult.
Yeah. On that issue, I would like to take a couple of minutes to speak
please.
about the the issue of spiking, especially in light of the fact that it has received considerable news attention of late. And I think it's important for us as a board to set the record straight as to how seriously we take the issue of pension spiking here at CalSTRS. It is a serious issue, and we have, in our history, have taken this issue very seriously, and we deal with it with great care. And we thoroughly and deliberate in reviewing suspected cases of spiking when it does occur. But at the same time, we do want to make sure that we protect the due process rights of our members, because if in fact spiking did occur, this will result in changing of their retirement benefit for the remainder, the rest of their lives. In cases where spiking has occurred or does occur, we respond by reducing the benefit. And we do that at the appropriate level, collecting overpayments in a manner which is consistent with the law. And I think that needs to be very clear, that we do that, and we do it in a way that is consistent with what the law states. And most recently in June, we took action to approve and support legislation, the Summidian bill, which, if amended, will go even further to help us try to reduce the likelihood that spiking will take place here at CalSTRS. I think it's also important to acknowledge and recognize that the issue of the $100,000 pensions are the exception and not the rule. And I think it's important to emphasize that. It is clearly the exception at CalSTRS for an educator who's been part of the system to have earned a $100,000 pension. And in those instances where the pension is at $100,000 or higher, that represents less than 2% of our entire membership. Another way of putting that is 98% of the members of CalSTRS do not receive a pension of $100,000 or more. And those that do receive that benefit have done so after dedicating essentially their entire professional career to teaching or administration, spending close to 4 decades, or 38 years on average, teaching or working as an administrator in the system. And in some of these instances, the 2% of folks who have earned that pension of $100,000 or more after 38 years or almost 4 decades of working in the profession sometimes do so because they also receive a spousal death benefit. So I just wanted to make sure that, Jack, because this is such an issue that we take very seriously as a board and as a staff, that we get this right. But it's equally important that those who are speaking about the issue, those in the Capitol, those in the media, those in the general public, have an accurate picture as to what this benefit is, and that where spiking has occurred or does occur, we will do everything within our power to remedy that, and to the extent possible, reduce the likelihood that it will happen here at CalSTRS.
Great. Absolutely listen to that and act on that. I think what makes sense for us is in September that we're not just presenting you with, because we've worked on this now for months, what the best ways we could make some administrative changes, not just to present a proposal, but in the next 7 weeks we'll lay some of the internal infrastructure down so that in September we're really ready to go on some of these actionable items in here. Again, not knowing if we'll see anything from the legislature this year or not that may change that direction. Again, we still would rather see a better set of rules, better black and white definition of what spiking is through legislation. But short of that, we'll apply some resources to act on the administrative side. And I want to stop at Peggy. I want to make sure, in case you'd like to add anything to that piece of it here, before we talk about some of the others here in terms of how you're working through those things.
Well, we have been working very diligently in the task force that we put together. It's a cross-functional unit. They are looking at what are the things that we absolutely can control and take charge of that might require some policy decisions or require us to shift resources, as Jack suggested, in addition to the things that we brought forward to you in June that would require legislative change or some plan design considerations. And so, I would expect that you will see some of the things that we've been talking about in early stages of development and implementation at that September meeting when we discuss this with the full board. We're going to begin the development of a compensation review unit. So we should be advertising for some positions to get us started. The first things that we have to do there is not just dive right in, but to create process so that we're very clear on how we will be handling cases. We will be setting up some whistleblower or pension hotlines. It would involve an 800 number, so anyone could call in. It would involve a button on our website, so someone could submit an online information about suspected spiking. You can send us mail. There are a variety of ways to contact us, but we're going to try and make it easier for the public to get information to us. And the compensation review unit that we'll be setting up will be responsible for managing those inquiries that come into us, as well as looking at probably around 5,000 cases a year, where we'll be defining the criteria that we would use, but it would include things like someone who receives a benefit over $100,000, or someone who has final compensation over $150,000, or someone who receives more than $15,000 in special compensation. I mean, we'll develop those criteria that will help us look at the kinds of things that could be elements of spiking. The fact that there are big compensation changes, the fact that someone makes over $100,000 in benefits doesn't mean that their benefit was spiked. And we can't draw a conclusion just from a number. We have to look at a variety of mechanisms behind that number: employment records, board minutes from local school boards, contracts. And so we'll be learning and developing the process around how to pull that information and look at all of that. And we do that on a haphazard basis. I don't want to say haphazard. We do that on an occasional basis now as issues come forward to us, but we haven't had the resources to systematically take a look at that, and that's what this unit will help us do. So we're getting started on that right now.
So, yeah, we look forward to that in September, and I'm confident that the board will support attempts to give you the human capital that you are going to need to undertake the work, because we simply can't ask you to take on more work without giving you additional assistance to get that work done. You're welcome.
And unless there's anything else on that topic, the other issues that are listed here on 97 and 98 really are the really hardy challenges for the organization to work through our installation of our new financial accounting system, which is now underway. We're under contract with the company to do that work. And so the sprint is on to implement the CARM, which is we call it the Corporate Accounting and Resource Management System. And of course, now we're ready to kick off the pension discovery part of it, which ultimately will deal with the challenges we've had in the pension administration system. Those really will have enormous intensive focus within this building and be everyone's highest priority.
Jack, just sorry for the interruption. I see someone at the Pat Geiger at the microphone. But Pat, would you mind holding your comments till when we do comments from the public? If that's what you do. I think so, because given that it's the business plan, we want to keep the flow going, and then we'll take comments from the public at the end. Thank you so much, Pat. Jack, back to you.
Okay. So anyway, this body that you see on these 2 pages, as you can tell, are very focused on risk and improving the organization. The last one I just want to speak to is on page 108. And again, one of your strengths that stands out so well in the environmental scan has been the strong ethical foundation of the organization at the board level and the staff level. And it's not just adherence to rules, which has been a good track record, but I think it's been a shared value system of ethics, and that we recognize we would never have the trust of our members if we don't start out with that core value. And the track record's been stellar over the years. Brian and his staff, and Robert Carlin right here on my far left, who you've all gotten to know through your filings and ethics rules, we've decided that there's a gap here in the ethics training between what the state of California offers, and each one of you have done, I'm sure, the famous web training or the written training that they have every 2 years. And although it's well-intentioned, There's no doubt about that. There's a gap of application of watching that training and then dealing with the situations that we have to deal with and know how to navigate those. So it ends up, you still got to ask a lot of questions of our attorneys all the time. So we wanted the legal staff, through Brian and Robert's leadership, really felt, let's design another program for us based on a little more relevance to CalSTRS. And again, we would require certification that our staff and board have gone through that ourselves, but let's make it more specific to what we do. So again, I think that keeps the ball moving forward here, that we're always observant of the rules and can understand them better, because we certainly have all read stories of how complicated the application of these are and where people do take missteps. So we want to prevent that. So that's on the training plan for this year, so that by the end of the fiscal year, we would have that in place to use going forward for the staff and for the board as well. So I think that'll be a good piece for us all. So let me stop there. Those are the ones I wanted to really punch up today for you in the conversation. And everyone's here to answer any questions on any specific objective or thing going forward.
Thanks, Jack. So when I open it up to questions from committee members, Jerry?
Mine was back on the spiking issue, and it's not so much a question as it is, and I don't know, Pat may be looking at the same thing, but it's to realize that most of those 100,000 plus, and there's a lot of local press, even in an area like mine, about the 100,000 plus, and people asking me who these people are. Most, I won't say almost exclusively, are administrators. And administrators who administer schools are in charge of very large entities in most areas, not quite as small as what we have in a little bit of ours. But the idea of teachers coming out of an education or out of a teaching career, having spent 30, 35, 40 years in a classroom, are not making 100,000 plus in almost all situations. So I want to note that. I think the hotline is probably a good idea, something that would be relatively, I would think, simple to install. But I always want to remind people when they look at teacher salaries that it's 6 years of college to even walk in the door. And we're being compared with other professions that do not require the education that teaching does. So, and then that's my soapbox, but off the soapbox, and I know, Pat, you have been a strong advocate of reverse mortgages, and I know we do now have a reverse mortgage program, yes, or is that still something we've thought about? No. Okay.
We had, but we don't.
Okay.
Well, the feds are, closing it down.
Okay, because I've just heard a lot over the last couple of weeks about people who are losing their homes because of reverse mortgages, and I don't think we want to be out there throwing our retired teachers out of their homes.
Hey, Joe?
I just want to comment on the SWOT analysis that you did on page 84 through 86. I think you did a good job at this. I like the fact that some of the threads are also opportunities. So you identified in both areas. So I think a lot of thought went into this. So I just want to commend the staff for their work on this.
Hey, Joe? Any other comments or questions from committee members?
Nope.
Do any of the other staff members, executive staff, have anything you want to add? Okay. Seeing none, thank you for the report, for the overview, and we look forward to working with you to accomplish the goals in the upcoming year.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack.
Very well done, thank you.
Okay, item number 9 on the agenda is any new business or information requests. Yeah, it's going to come up next, Pedro. We'll get there. Any requests for information? I don't recall any. Okay. If you could just take a review of the draft agenda, item number 10.
And we'll add to the agenda the changes you made earlier today from the business plans. You made a few adjustments on which month, so this means this draft you see is going to be a little different, adding particularly the governance model for business review and the anti-spiking proposal. Those will be added to the board meeting.
Okay. All right, those changes, okay, thank you. 10A is the opportunity for statements from the public. Pat Geiger. Geyer.
I'm sure all of you have seen the Sacramento Bee article that Ginger Rutland did, and I have dealt with a number of phone calls and other questions about it. So I guess my point, I know what you're going through, but my point is that we need to get the information out there that we are looking into this. There are probably some examples. I don't know the details of this poor gentleman that had all kinds of trouble with his job. I can sort of guess what may have happened. But get the information out. This really doesn't make us look very good. And if we can deal with spiking, I think it's important that we do so.
Thank you, Pat. And before we go to the next person, Ms. Fritz, I just want to reiterate what I said earlier, that it's important that the public realize how serious this board and this staff takes pension spiking, that we continue to do everything within our power to make sure that it doesn't happen, to make changes when it does. But equally important, in maybe more so, is the need for the facts to be clearly stated by the legislature and the public as to the magnitude of this problem here at CalSTRS and what it actually represents and reflects. So with that, we'll go to Marcia Fritz.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Marcia Fritz, the president of the California Foundation for Fiscal Responsibility. I'm also a task force member of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, Accounting and Reporting for Pensions. We just came out with an exposure draft that's going to take effect in 2013. I spent a lot of time working with GASB on helping them develop that. Prop 162, which was passed quite a while ago, I think 1992, it provides that the board's duty to participants and beneficiaries takes precedence over any other duty. That doesn't mean you're supposed to give high-paid workers more attention than lower-paid workers, or full-career employees more attention than those that work just partial career, or even put your participants that are currently working over the participants that are retired. It's a very broad requirement that Prop 13, or Prop 162 gave to you as board members. In a few days, our organization will be releasing a report that's an add-on to a report we released a study that we did a couple months ago that actually compared benefits of various classes of employees, government employees, to the private sector and to the federal workers. And I was very stunned to realize how poor the benefit design is for teachers compared to federal workers and compared to the private sector. We've gone beyond that now, and we are going to be coming out with a cost estimate of what would happen if two reform proposals actually took effect through initiative or otherwise, one of them being a hybrid, which is similar to what the federal workers get, and another one being a 401k. And what we found is that if we were to go with a reform proposal of, let's just talk about hybrid, because frankly, I'm not a 401k proponent at all. I just did that because we did it. But if we were to go to a hybrid, it would actually cost schools more money than what, or the pensions would actually cost more for teachers than what the cost is today, regardless of how you're paying it. I know you're not funding it, but the cost on an accrual basis would be more with a federal system than it is right now. However, the costs would be offset by the lower cost to what we're paying for classified workers' benefits, which are higher than what teachers get. They get Social Security plus a 2.5 at 55. Their costs would be lower, Plus, if a salary cap were put in place, the costs of the administrators, the higher paid workers, would be lower. Ignore that. So what I'm asking CalSTRS to do, we're coming out with the plan. We are going to be identifying the funder of the study. I know we've been getting a lot of heat because of this out-of-state billionaire. The funder is now willing to put their name on the project as far as funding it. They had nothing to do with the direction or how we did it. But what I would like from CalSTRS is to look very objectively to the study and not just do a heck no, because if we were to take some of the put into place some of the suggestions that we have with the hybrid, it will affect some of your higher paid teachers, or higher paid administrators, I should say. And it may possibly affect some of your retirees. If some of the, so if you could just remember what Prop 162 really gives you, it gives you broad authority to put your members equally. I estimate that if the hybrid took place tomorrow and impacted your teachers tomorrow, 78% of them would have a better benefit. 78%. So really keep that in mind, and that's all I ask. Thank you.
Ms. Fritz, before you leave the microphone, who's the funder of the study?
I'm not quite ready to say that.
Okay.
They are out of state, but they don't quite have their website up, and they don't have a communications director. So that's a holdup.
Fair enough. And before we turn, Mr. Derman's approach.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of, since you made reference to the other study, and we didn't have any particular immediate response to the initial study because we wanted to actually look at it very closely in terms of the study that was done. And we asked Milliman to sort of essentially reverse engineer what was the study that was done a couple months ago, and they've just completed that analysis. And so we'll be preparing a summary of what they found, and our conclusions are very different in terms of what she's suggesting in terms of whether or not the benefits would be better or worse and what the cost would be. We don't agree with the conclusions that were reached in her study, and we'll be able to provide more detail to that in the next several days. So we just want to make sure that you are aware that we do look at these studies very objectively. That's why we spent a great deal of time trying to make sure we understood exactly what was being suggested a couple months ago.
Yeah, and I'm sure, as you know, the board's desire to look at these issues and digest as much information as we possibly can on the debate so that we can process all of the different views and data. Please be sure that the board gets a copy of that.
In fact, this will be really widely distributed.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to, your time, you went 5 minutes,
okay.
So I appreciate your comments.
Since I've got him here, I wanted to say
You can catch him in the hallway or something. We're going to move on to, thank you, Mr. Derman. Thank you, Ms. Fritz. We are going to, I think that brings us to the end of our work for the board meeting, and we could take a 5-minute transition break, and we will reconvene in 5 minutes for the investment committee. Okay, thank you very much.